The mysterious arrival. The classroom was silent as the alien students gathered for their first lesson of the day. It was a peaceful, routine day at the Galactic Academy, where students from all corners of the galaxy came to study and learn. But today, something felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if something unusual was about to happen. The door to the classroom opened slowly. At first, no one could see who or what was entering. Then, one by one, the Deathworlder cadets stepped into the room. The aliens in the classroom stopped what they were doing, staring at the newcomers. These cadets were unlike any beings the others had ever seen. They weren't exactly alien, but they certainly weren't from any peaceful world either. The Deathworlders were known throughout the galaxy, though most had only heard stories about them. They were a fierce, warlike species from a planet that was more dangerous than any other. Their world was full of wild, deadly creatures, and they had learned to survive by being just as fierce. But no one had ever seen their pets. Today, that would change. The cadets entered the room with calm confidence, their powerful presence filling the space. But it wasn't just them that everyone was looking at. It was what they were bringing with them, the creatures that followed behind them. These pets, as the cadets called them, were something the alien students could never have imagined. The first creature to appear was enormous. Its body was covered in thick, armored scales, and its eyes glowed with an unsettling yellow light. It walked on 4 muscular legs, each step causing the floor to shake. The aliens couldn't take their eyes off it. It looked like something from their worst nightmares, a monster that belonged in the wildest of Deathworlder forests. But the cadet walking beside it didn't seem to notice. He simply patted the creature's head like it was a harmless dog. Next came another creature. This one was smaller, but no less terrifying. It had sharp, pointed spikes running down its back and a tail that whipped back and forth with dangerous precision. Its eyes were cold and calculating, and it moved with the kind of speed that made the aliens nervous. It was clear that the creature was fully aware of its surroundings, and it was ready for anything. A third creature entered the room, and this one was even stranger. It was almost invisible to the naked eye, its form flickering like a mirage. Only when it moved did the alien students realize what it was, something that seemed to bend and warp the air around it. The alien students watched in disbelief as the creature blinked into view for a moment, its shape shifting, and then blinked out again. It was both terrifying and fascinating. The last creature was something the aliens had no words for. It was a mix of both animal and machine, a cybernetic beast with glowing metal limbs and a mechanical heart. It walked alongside its Deathworlder cadet, its movements smooth and efficient. The cadet didn't even seem to notice the stares as the creature's mechanical claws clicked against the floor. It was clear that the creature had been built for one purpose: to survive and dominate. The students in the classroom watched in silence as the Deathworlder cadets moved toward the front. Their faces were blank, and their eyes showed no sign of fear. These were beings who had grown up in a world where survival was the only rule. They had learned to live with their terrifying pets, and they treated them not as monsters, but as companions. The aliens, on the other hand, could barely breathe. They had never seen anything like this before. In their world, they had trained and studied in peace, surrounded by beings who valued cooperation and diplomacy. But the creatures they were seeing now were nothing like that. These were not just wild animals. They were warriors, bred for survival in the harshest of conditions. And now, they were in a classroom filled with students who had never known such danger. One of the alien students, a young being from a peaceful planet, couldn't take it anymore. He stood up and asked the question on everyone's mind. What are these things? His voice trembled as he spoke, his eyes wide with fear. The Deathworlder cadet, standing next to the armored creature, turned to him and smiled. "These are our pets," he said simply, as if the answer should have been obvious. "They are our companions, our allies, our protectors." The aliens exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. To them, The idea of having such dangerous creatures as pets was completely unfathomable. They couldn't imagine what kind of life the Deathworlders must have lived to form such bonds with such terrifying beasts. The instructor, an experienced alien from a long-lived species, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We will begin our lesson shortly," he said, though his voice was strained. "Please take your seats, everyone." But the tension in the room didn't disappear. It was clear that no one was thinking about the lesson anymore. All the alien students could focus on were the creatures that had entered their classroom, and the strange, deadly world from which they had come. As the cadets and their pets settled into the room, the atmosphere remained thick with unease. The aliens tried to go back to their work, but their minds kept drifting to the monsters sitting quietly in the corner, as if waiting for the moment when their true nature would be revealed. What had the Deathworlders brought with them, and what would happen next? No one could have known, but one thing was certain. This was a day none of them would ever forget. The reactions of the class. The classroom buzzed with whispers, each student trying to process what they had just seen. The Deathworlder cadets, their creatures sitting obediently beside them, had stirred a level of confusion, fear, and awe among the alien students. No one could believe what they were witnessing. In the back of the room, a tall, slender alien from a planet that valued harmony more than anything else stood frozen. His green skin glowed faintly in the dim light, but his wide, shocked eyes betrayed his calm exterior. The creatures the Deathworlders had brought with them were a direct threat to everything. He had been taught about the peaceful nature of the universe. To him, they were weapons, not pets. Beside him, a student from a desert planet fidgeted uncomfortably, her thin, sandy yellow skin shivering with tension. She had grown up on a world with harsh conditions, but nothing like the creatures in the classroom. Her people survived by adapting to their environment, not by taming dangerous monsters. She could hardly fathom why anyone would willingly bring something so deadly into their personal space. At the front of the class, the instructor, a seasoned alien who had been teaching for centuries, shifted nervously. His species had been around long enough to see many galactic conflicts and had witnessed countless creatures, but nothing like this, had ever been brought into the classroom. His voice faltered as he called for order. "Students, please," he began, trying to remain composed. "We are here to learn, not to be distracted by these unusual animals." But his words did little to ease the tension. The creatures, although silent and seemingly calm, radiated a menacing energy. The cadets themselves seemed completely unfazed by their presence, but that only made the situation even more unsettling. The alien students had to wonder, were these creatures under the control of the Deathworlders, or were they dangerous predators just waiting to strike? One of the younger cadets, who had been sitting quietly near the back of the room, suddenly stood up. His voice was firm as he addressed the class. "You all think we're crazy for bringing these creatures here," he said. "But back on our home planet, we live with them. These creatures are part of our survival. They've been with us since birth." His eyes flickered with a mix of pride and annoyance. "They are family." The alien students exchanged confused glances. Family. How could anyone consider such fearsome, destructive beings family? Was it possible to form a bond with creatures that were so inherently dangerous? The cadet continued, his gaze never wavering. "You all are so used to peace and safety that you forget how it feels to live with constant danger. Our creatures help us survive. They are our protectors, our teachers, and sometimes our closest companions." As the cadet spoke, a shift began to happen. The alien students' initial fear began to turn into curiosity. Some still couldn't understand how anyone could tame such terrifying beasts, but others started to question their own ideas of what a pet could be. Could there be more to these creatures than just violence? Could the Deathworlders have a deeper connection with them? The instructor finally raised his hand, asking for silence. "Let us proceed with the lesson," he said. His tone was firm but not harsh, as though he too was trying to settle his own nerves. "We will study how the Deathworlders and their creatures have learned to live together. Perhaps it will give us some insight into the nature of survival itself. The lesson continued, but the room remained charged with tension. The cadets, having offered their explanation, sat back down, their creatures at their sides. The creatures, though unnerving, remained oddly still. The students couldn't shake the feeling that the monsters were silently observing them, waiting for something, or perhaps judging them. As the lesson went on, the instructor shifted the focus to the biology and behavior of the Deathworlders creatures. He spoke of their ability to adapt to the most hostile environments, to thrive where other species would falter. But even as he spoke of their strengths, the alien students couldn't stop glancing nervously at the creatures sitting quietly in the corner. Were they truly as tame as the cadets claimed, or was there something far more dangerous lurking beneath their calm exterior? A few students, eager to learn more, raised their hands. "How do you control them?" one asked. "How do you know they won't attack us?" The Deathworlder cadet, who had spoken earlier, smiled faintly. "Control," he repeated, as though the idea was foreign to him. "We don't control them. We understand them. We don't need to control them. They've been part of us for so long that we are in tune with them. We communicate in ways that go beyond words." The response only deepened the mystery for the other students. How could these creatures, which seemed so dangerous and unpredictable, be understood in such a profound way? How could the Deathworlders maintain such harmony with them? The instructor saw the growing curiosity among the class and decided to take a risk. "Perhaps after today's lesson, you will be able to learn a little more about these creatures in a practical way." At his words, the room went silent. The alien students exchanged nervous glances. What could the instructor possibly mean? Were they really going to be asked to interact with these creatures? The thought sent a wave of unease through the room, but there was also something else, an undeniable sense of excitement. This would be an experience unlike anything they had ever encountered. As the cadets and their creatures settled in, it was clear that today's lesson was not going to be like any other. The students were about to learn something that would challenge everything they knew about themselves, their worlds, and the creatures they had once feared. The lesson had only just begun, but already the alien students knew one thing for sure. The Deathworlders had brought more than just monsters to class. They had brought a challenge that would force them to rethink everything they thought they knew about life, survival, and what it meant to coexist. The rest of the galaxy would never look the same after today. The tension in the room had reached a boiling point. The students, both alien and Deathworlder, had been sitting silently, their eyes flicking between the cadets and their strange, intimidating creatures. Some of the alien students still couldn't fathom how anyone could live with such dangerous beasts, let alone form a bond with them. But there was no turning back now. They had been promised a closer look, and the instructor had warned them that this was not going to be a typical lesson. The first cadet, a young human male with sharp blue eyes, stood up slowly, signaling to his creature. It was a massive beast, more like a living tank than anything the alien students had ever seen. Covered in thick, armored plating, it resembled a hybrid of a reptile and an insect, with rows of spiny legs that twitched and shifted as it moved. Its eyes were cold and yellow, burning with an intelligence that made the room's air feel thick with discomfort. The cadet approached the creature with caution, but it responded to him with a low guttural growl that somehow sounded more affectionate than threatening. To the alien students, it was a chilling display. How could anyone feel safe near something so obviously dangerous? "You see," the cadet began, his voice steady. "This is Tregoth. He's not just a pet. He's a guardian, a companion. We don't control him. We communicate through actions, through understanding. We've been through many battles together, and in each one, we learned from each other." He raised a hand, and Tregoth lowered its massive head to gently nudge him, the creature's powerful jaw sending a slight tremor through the floor. The cadet didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled and spoke again. "He knows I'm here to protect him, just as I know he's here to protect me." The alien students were transfixed, unsure whether to be terrified or intrigued. How was it possible to bond with something so fearsome? They couldn't imagine living with such a creature. Some of them had pets back home, small, docile creatures that required little care, nothing compared to the deadly beasts before them. At the far end of the room, a female cadet stood up with her own creature. This one was smaller than Tregoth, but no less intimidating. It resembled a sleek, fur-covered giant arachnid, its many legs moving with fluid grace as it crawled toward her. Its large eyes glinted with a sharpness that made the room feel colder. "This," the female cadet said, "is Lyra. She's one of the most intelligent species from our world. We've trained together since I was a child. She reads my movements, my thoughts, almost before I think them. Together, we are unstoppable." As she spoke, Lyra moved closer, her many legs tapping lightly on the floor as she approached the alien students. Despite the creature's size and the terrifying number of legs, there was a certain grace in its movements. The students couldn't help but marvel at how easily it moved in sync with its owner. One brave student from a peaceful, plant-based world stood up and took a step forward. His long green fingers trembled as he gestured toward Lyra. How do you know she won't turn on you?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "She looks so powerful." The cadet smiled, a hint of pride in her voice. "Lyra won't turn on me because she trusts me. We've been through battles, we've fought side by side, and I've always protected her. She's more than a weapon. She's my family, just like the others." She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the other cadets. "We all have a bond with our creatures that goes beyond training. We are partners. We depend on each other to survive." The alien students were still processing the cadet's words when the instructor spoke up again, his voice breaking through the tension. "I believe it's time for the final test," he said calmly. "You will each be given a chance to interact with these creatures. But be warned, these creatures do not respond to fear. They respond to trust." The room fell deathly quiet as the instructor's words sank in. The idea of interacting with the Deathworlders creatures felt impossible to some. How could they trust such terrifying beasts? The creatures had teeth that could tear through metal and claws that could shred anything in their path. But the instructor had made it clear, this wasn't about fear. It was about something deeper. "Each of you will approach one of the creatures," the instructor continued. "No weapons, no barriers, just you and the creature. Show the Deathworlders you are capable of understanding, of forming a connection. They will not attack you unless they sense fear. They must know that you are not a threat to them." The cadets stepped back as the alien students hesitated. Some felt the weight of the challenge pressing down on them. Others, more curious than scared, took a step forward. The room was thick with suspense, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Could they do it? Could they interact with these terrifying creatures without succumbing to their fear? One by one, the alien students moved forward, their hearts racing. Some of them approached with trembling hands, others with a quiet determination. And as they came closer, the creatures observed them, their glowing eyes scanning every movement. A few of the students, those who had initially been most fearful, began to speak softly to the creatures, unsure of what else to do. They mimicked the cadets, repeating the same calm gestures, hoping the creatures would sense their intentions. But the creatures remained still, their piercing eyes never leaving the students. They were judging, testing the students' resolve. Could they see beyond the fear? Could they trust that these new beings would not harm them? In the end, it wasn't the creatures who made the first move. It was the alien students. Slowly, cautiously, some of them began to lower their fear, replacing it with curiosity. With each passing moment, they understood a little more about the strange bond between the Deathworlders and their creatures. The test was not about survival. It was about understanding, trust. And for the first time, the alien students realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to these creatures than they had ever imagined. Perhaps there was more to the Deathworlders as well. The unexpected bond. The air in the classroom grew even heavier as the alien students took their first steps towards the Deathworlders creatures. The tension was palpable, a feeling of collective unease sweeping through the room. To them, the creatures were nothing short of monsters, beasts so alien and powerful that they seemed impossible to tame. Yet, the cadets had not only tamed them, they had befriended them. The creatures were as much a part of their lives as their own hearts. One by one, the alien students stood before the terrifying beasts, a mixture of fear and curiosity in their eyes. Some of them hesitated, feeling the weight of the challenge pressing down on their chests. But others, their hearts pounding with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety, took tentative steps forward. At first, it was a series of awkward, clumsy movements. One student reached out toward the sleek, fur-covered arachnid-like creature, Lyra, with trembling hands. The creature's many eyes watched him intently, its sleek, spiny legs moving slightly, but it made no move to attack. It merely observed him, as if assessing his intentions. The student swallowed hard, his voice shaky as he spoke. I don't know what you are," he began, his voice softer now. "But I want to understand. I want to know why. Why you trust them." He glanced toward the cadets, who had already begun to smile at the progress the alien students were making. The cadets' creatures shifted, their eyes glowing slightly in the low light of the classroom. It was almost as if they were listening, sensing the alien student's vulnerability. The creatures seemed to accept his words, watching him with interest but showing no signs of aggression. The instructor, standing off to the side, nodded approvingly. "The creatures are sensitive to your emotions. They will know if you are honest, if you mean what you say. You must show them that you are no threat. Your fear only makes you more vulnerable." Another alien student, a tall figure from a world where the dominant species had a liquid-like form, stepped up next. He was more confident, though the nervous tension was still visible in his eyes. As he approached one of the larger reptilian creatures, a creature with thick, armored scales, he reached out a long tendril, trying to make contact with the beast's cold, rough hide. The creature did not flinch. Instead, it slowly turned its head toward the student, its gaze locking onto his. It was a terrifying moment, one that made every muscle in the student's body freeze. But then, unexpectedly, the creature lowered its massive head, its jaw slowly opening, revealing rows of sharp teeth. For a moment, the student thought he had made a grave mistake, but instead of attacking, the creature gently nudged his tendril with its own, a surprising display of affection. The alien student let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and a quiet smile spread across his face. He had expected pain. He had expected rejection. But instead, the creature had given him its trust. The student now felt a strange connection, something that defied the fear he had once felt for these monsters. Nearby, the first cadet, the young male who had introduced his creature earlier, turned to the alien students. "You see," he said, his voice calm but filled with pride, "it's not about control. It's about trust. These creatures, our partners, are not tools or weapons. They are family. And just like any family, they only want to protect us. But they won't do that unless they know we will protect them too." The room seemed to fall into a deep silence as the alien students processed the cadets' words. The bond between the Deathworlders and their creatures had always been something they couldn't understand. Now, they were beginning to see it. It wasn't just about a shared history of survival. It was about something deeper, something more profound. The next alien student, a small, thin figure from a world of dense fog and acidic rains, approached a massive creature that resembled a bear crossed with a rhinoceros. The creature's tusks gleamed in the low light, and its massive paws pounded the floor as it shifted its weight. The student stood before it, unsure of how to proceed, but feeling an overwhelming urge to try. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature merely stared at the student, its massive form towering over the tiny alien. Then, something incredible happened. The creature slowly lowered its head, nudging the student with its massive snout. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation. The student hesitated for a moment, but then reached out with trembling hands, brushing against the creature's rough fur. A small gasp escaped the student's lips as he realized the beast was warm, its skin almost human in texture. He had expected cold, impenetrable armor, not something so organic. The warmth of the creature's body sent a wave of comfort through him. For the first time, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, an understanding that, despite the creature's power, it was not a monster, it was a partner. That's it, the cadet from earlier whispered to the group. You've made the first step. You've shown them your heart, and they've shown you theirs. The room was no longer filled with fear. Instead, a new emotion had taken over. It was curiosity, yes, but also respect. Respect for the creatures. Respect for the bond the Deathworlders shared with them. And perhaps for the first time, respect for themselves. The students looked around at each other, some with wide eyes and others with thoughtful expressions. The fear was gone, replaced by awe. They had expected to be terrified, to struggle to survive in the presence of such monsters. But instead, they had found something entirely different, a bond that transcended their understanding. The instructor nodded, proud of how far they had come. Now that you've learned what it means to trust these creatures, it's time to learn how to fight with them. But remember, the strongest bond is the one that's built on trust. Without it, even the greatest of allies are useless. The students nodded, their minds swirling with the new knowledge. They had faced their fears, and they had made their first connection with the Deathworlders creatures. But this was just the beginning. Now, the real lessons would begin. And for the first time, the alien students understood. They weren't just learning about creatures, they were learning about family. The first test. The following day, the atmosphere in the classroom was noticeably different. The once tense air, filled with fear and uncertainty, had now shifted into something more focused, something resembling anticipation. The alien students were no longer filled with dread at the thought of facing the creatures brought in by the Deathworlders. Instead, they stood tall, their minds sharp, prepared for what was to come. Today, they would face their first real test. The instructor, a tall, dignified figure who had watched the progression of the students over the past days, stood at the front of the classroom, his eyes scanning the room carefully. He was not one to hand out praise lightly. But today, he couldn't help but acknowledge how far they had come in such a short time. Today, he began, his voice low and serious. You will experience what the Deathworlders know so well. True partnership with these creatures. But it won't be easy. The test will require not only trust, but also understanding. These creatures can be fierce when they need to be. You will face them as a team, and you will need to prove that you can work together. A murmur ran through the students. Some looked at each other with uncertainty, but others were more confident now. They had seen what the Deathworlders and their creatures were capable of, and they had learned that the beasts, while terrifying, were also capable of incredible loyalty and care. The Deathworlders stood off to one side, watching closely. Their expressions were calm, but their eyes gleamed with a quiet pride. They knew the alien students had made remarkable progress, but they were also aware that the true test was still ahead. It would not be enough to simply tame the creatures. They needed to understand them on a deeper level. The instructor motioned toward the door. Your challenge awaits outside. Prepare yourselves. The students stood, silently gathering their things. They had no idea what to expect, but there was a palpable sense of determination in the air. The alien students were ready to face whatever came their way, their bond with the creatures now something solid, something real. As they stepped outside, the sun burned hot above them, casting long shadows over the training ground. The alien students surveyed the area, unsure of what to expect. But their uncertainty quickly turned to surprise as the Deathworlders creatures appeared, more than a dozen of them, each larger and more intimidating than anything the aliens had ever seen. The creatures were arranged in a loose formation, some sitting patiently, others standing, their eyes scanning the students. The alien cadets had gotten used to their presence over the past few days, but seeing them all at once in this setting made the creatures appear even more imposing. The instructor stepped forward. "This is the first part of your test, communication. Each of you will need to approach a creature and establish a connection. But remember, the creatures are not here to be tamed by force. You must show them that you are worthy of their trust. Only then will they work with you." The alien students exchanged nervous glances. They had learned the importance of trust, but now they were being asked to prove themselves. One student, a tall and muscular alien from a warlike planet, stepped forward first. He approached the largest creature, a massive armored beast that resembled a cross between a lion and an elephant. The creature was sitting calmly, but its sharp eyes followed the alien as he approached. The student took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. He remembered the lessons about trust and connection. Slowly, he reached out a hand, the gesture tentative at first. The creature watched him intently, its ears twitching slightly. There was a long moment of silence, the tension in the air almost unbearable. Then, without warning, the creature let out a low growl, a sound that sent a chill down the student's spine. He froze, unsure of what to do next. But then he remembered the instructor's words. "You must show them you are no threat." With that thought in mind, the student relaxed his posture, lowering his hand until it was closer to the creature's side. He spoke softly, almost as if whispering to the beast. "I don't want to fight you. I only want to understand. I'm not your enemy." The creature's growl softened. It slowly, cautiously, began to lower its head. The alien student's heart pounded as he waited for the next move. He was fully aware that the creature could attack at any moment if it felt threatened, but he refused to back down. His trust in the lessons he had learned with the Deathworlders and their creatures kept him grounded. Finally, the creature's massive head gently nudged the student's hand. It was not an attack. It was a gesture of acceptance. The student's breath caught in his throat, and he smiled. "I knew you could do it," a familiar voice called out from behind. It was one of the Deathworlders. The cadet gave him a small, encouraging nod. The student turned to look back at his fellow aliens, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. The bond between the Deathworlders and their creatures had seemed impossible to understand. But now, the alien students were beginning to see it for themselves. One by one, each student approached a different creature, carefully following the example set by the first. Some were more hesitant than others, but each slowly, and with varying degrees of success, managed to make contact. There were moments of tension, but also moments of triumph. And little by little, the alien students realized that the creatures they had once feared were not monsters. They were just as capable of understanding and connection as any other species. The test was far from over, but this first step had been crucial. The alien students had passed the first trial. They had shown the creatures that they were not enemies. They had shown them their true intentions, and with that, a new chapter in their journey had begun. As the last of the students made their connections, the instructor nodded again, his face unreadable. But there was a glint of pride in his eyes that none of the students missed. "You have done well," he said simply. "But this is only the beginning. The real challenge is still ahead." The students exchanged looks, their faces a mix of uncertainty and excitement. They had passed the first test, but now they had to prove themselves once again. And this time, they knew it wouldn't be just the creatures they had to face. The true nature of the beasts. The sun was now dipping low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the training grounds. The air was heavy with the sounds of distant creatures calling out in the wilds beyond the campus. It was the perfect setting for the next challenge that awaited the alien students. As they stood in formation, still processing the success of their previous test, the instructor spoke with a quiet but commanding voice. "This next stage is not about trust or communication anymore. This is about survival. Today, You will face the true nature of the Deathworlders beasts. The alien cadets exchanged uneasy glances. They had grown accustomed to the creature's presence, but they had yet to truly see what these animals were capable of. After all, the Deathworlders creatures were not just any ordinary beasts. They had survived in a brutal, unforgiving environment, a place where only the strongest could survive. The students had learned to respect them, but they had yet to truly witness their raw power and aggression. The instructor motioned to the far side of the training grounds, where several large cages had been set up. Inside each cage was a creature of a different kind, each one larger and more fearsome than the last. These were not the creatures the students had encountered before. These were the true warriors of Deathworld, the apex predators of a brutal planet. One of the cadets, a tall alien with sleek silver skin and elongated limbs, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the cages. He had never seen creatures like these before. Some of them resembled massive, muscular lizards. Others had 6 eyes that glowed an eerie red in the fading light, while some were covered in spiny armor, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. He couldn't help but feel a rising sense of dread as the instructor's words sank in. "You will each be paired with one of these creatures," the instructor continued. "Your task is simple. You must work together to defeat a simulated enemy. These creatures will test you. They will push you to your limits. If you fail to prove your worth, you may not leave this field." A chill ran down the cadet's spine. The thought of facing one of these beasts in a life-or-death simulation was overwhelming. The creatures had the potential to tear through an alien body with ease, their sharp claws and fangs designed for one purpose: survival. The Deathworlders had trained them for this, but now, the alien cadets would have to prove that they could hold their own. As the students lined up, their hearts beating in their chests, the instructor gave them one last piece of advice. "Remember, your bond with the creatures is your greatest strength. Work together, stay calm, and adapt. The creatures will not hesitate to fight you if they sense fear, but if they trust you, they will fight alongside you." The cadets were each paired with a creature, their faces grim as they made their way to the pens. The massive beasts inside snarled and paced, their eyes tracking every movement. The sound of claws scraping against the ground echoed in the air, making the students' nerves tighten. The first pair, a smaller alien with orange-tinted skin and a tall Deathworlder cadet, moved toward their creature, a large, sleek predator with razor-sharp claws. The alien cadet took a deep breath and placed one hand on the creature's rough hide, feeling the raw power beneath the surface. It was warm and alive, a stark contrast to the cold steel of the training room. The creature looked up at him, its glowing eyes flicking from side to side. Without warning, it let out a deafening roar and lunged forward with terrifying speed. The alien cadet was thrown back as the creature's powerful jaws snapped inches from his face. He scrambled to his feet, heart racing, as the Deathworlder cadet called out to him. "Get up. Fight with it. Don't let it control you." Panic gripped the alien student's chest, but he forced himself to focus. He remembered the lessons of trust, of understanding the creature's instincts. He reached out again, but this time, he did not approach with fear. He made himself small, calm, and open to the creature, feeling its pulse, its breath. Slowly, the creature stopped, eyeing him with wariness before stepping back, its massive body still coiled and ready for another strike. The Deathworlder cadet nodded in approval. "That's it. Let it come to you." The alien cadet stood, his legs shaking with adrenaline. He had made it through the first stage, barely, but he knew this was just the beginning. The creature was not his enemy. It was a partner, but they needed to prove that they could survive together. Meanwhile, across the field, another pair of cadets faced their own challenge. A tall, armored alien with golden scales stood before an even more terrifying creature, an enormous beast with multiple tentacles that whipped through the air, each tipped with sharp barbs. The creature's hissing, wet breaths filled the air as it surveyed the cadets. "Stay focused," the instructor called from the sidelines. This one's tricky. It will test your ability to adapt quickly. One wrong move, and it could have you. The golden-scaled cadet nodded, moving cautiously toward the creature. The beast's tentacles lashed out, forcing the cadet to jump back just in time. With every strike, the alien's heart raced, but he held his ground. His Deathworlder partner whispered instructions, guiding him through the moves. Focus on its rhythm, the Deathworlder cadet called. Wait for the pause between attacks. That's when you strike. The golden-scaled cadet focused all his attention on the creature. He could see the way its tentacles moved, the pattern of the attacks. It wasn't random. It was methodical. As the creature lunged, the cadet dodged to the side and struck, driving his blade deep into one of the tentacles. The creature howled, the force of the blow causing it to stagger back. The two cadets stood together, their breathing heavy, but there was no time to celebrate. The challenge was far from over. On the far side of the field, another student faced yet another creature, but each test was the same: survival, teamwork, and trust. The alien cadets were learning, adapting, and proving themselves, but they were also beginning to understand that this lesson was about more than just surviving the creatures. It was about forging a bond with them, understanding that these beasts were not enemies. They were allies, creatures to be respected, and most of all, to be trusted. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the students began to feel the weight of the day's lessons. They had made it through the first round of tests, but there was still so much more to learn. The creatures were only the beginning. But one thing was clear: they were no longer strangers to the Deathworlders beasts. They had become part of the story. And the story was far from over. The ultimate test. The final day of the challenge had arrived. The cadets were tired, covered in dirt and sweat, and their minds were stretched to their limits. But none of that mattered now. The instructor stood before them, watching intently as the sun rose, casting a long shadow over the training grounds. "You've all done well so far," the instructor said, his voice deep and steady. "But today, you will face the ultimate test. This is where you either prove your worth or fail." The cadets exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was to come. They had learned how to survive alongside the Deathworlders beasts. They had learned to read their movements, to communicate, and even to fight beside them. But now, they were about to face a trial that would push them beyond anything they had ever known. The instructor motioned to the far end of the training grounds. "On the other side of this field lies a simulation, a test of your skills. You will enter as a team, and your task is to survive. The creatures will not be held back. The only rule is that you must work together." The cadets knew this wasn't just another exercise. This was real. There would be no second chances. The creatures they would face today were more dangerous, more aggressive, and more unpredictable than any they had faced before, and they would have to rely on each other and on their bond with the creatures to survive. As the cadets gathered in formation, the creatures they had worked with over the past few days were brought to the front. Some of them were still wild, their eyes filled with an intensity that made the cadets' hearts race, but others stood calmly, awaiting the challenge. They had formed a bond with these creatures, and the bond was stronger than any fear they felt. One by one, the cadets mounted their creatures, their grips tight on the reins. The tension in the air was palpable. They had come so far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The instructor gave them one last piece of advice. "Remember, today you fight for survival, but you also fight for each other. Don't forget that. Work together, and you may just make it out alive." With a deep breath, the cadets pushed forward, moving into the field. As they crossed the threshold, they were immediately met by the sounds of movement, snarls, growls, and the rustling of leaves. The creatures were everywhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first creature attacked without warning. It was a massive, armored beast, with 4 powerful legs and tusks as long as a cadet's body. The alien cadet riding it barely had time to react before the beast charge, its massive body crashing through the underbrush. "Stay alert," the instructor shouted. "They won't give you a moment's rest." The cadets fought back with everything they had. Blades clashed against armor, and energy weapons lit up the battlefield. But this wasn't just about brute force. It was about strategy, precision, and timing. The cadets had to think quickly and use everything they had learned in the past days. The cadet with the sleek, silver-skinned creature worked in perfect harmony with it, anticipating every movement and every strike. They made a formidable team. The cadet's creature lunged forward, its jaws snapping just inches from an attacking creature's throat. The cadet moved swiftly, striking with a quick blow that disabled the creature before it could retaliate. Meanwhile, the golden-scaled cadet worked alongside his massive beast, the tentacled monster he had once feared. But now, they were a team. The cadet led the creature in precise movements, using its tentacles to ensnare the enemies that came too close. Together, they fought back wave after wave of attackers, each creature falling under their combined strength. But the true test came when the larger, more dangerous creatures emerged. These were the apex predators, the ones that had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to strike. They were faster, smarter, and more lethal than anything the cadets had faced so far. One creature, a massive beast with sharp, jagged teeth and leathery wings, swooped down from above, targeting the group with deadly accuracy. It was unlike anything the cadets had seen before, a perfect killing machine. The silver-skinned cadet's creature lunged at the beast, but the flying creature was faster, darting out of reach. With a roar, it turned its attention to the cadet, diving toward him with a ferocity that left no time to react. But the cadet was ready. He had learned that in moments like this, the key was trust. He trusted his creature, and his creature trusted him. At the last second, he jumped from the saddle and landed on the beast's back, his weapon raised high. With a single, well-placed strike, he disabled the flying creature, sending it crashing to the ground. The cadets cheered, but their celebration was short-lived. The remaining predators were still circling, and the final test was far from over. They had to remain united, continue working together, and face whatever came next. This wasn't just about surviving the beasts. It was about proving that they had become a part of something greater. As the battle raged on, the cadets began to understand the true meaning of the challenge. It wasn't just about facing down dangerous creatures. It was about facing their fears, working together, and adapting in the heat of battle. The final test was not a battle won by force alone. It was a battle won through unity, trust, and the strength of the bonds they had formed with the Deathworlders beasts. And as the dust settled and the last of the creatures were defeated, the cadets knew that they had passed the ultimate test. They had become more than just students. They had become partners with the creatures they had once feared. They had become true warriors, ready to face any challenge the universe had to offer. And in that moment, they knew one thing for certain. The Deathworlders' world had changed them forever.